All right, hello there, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Majmora, and this is episode 24 of the Kings and Plebeians podcast. And what a special one it will be. Today, I'll have the honor and pleasure of talking to three members of the Forgotten Empires team, which most of you will know is the studio responsible for the development and maintenance of Age of Empires 2. Some fans of the show will definitely remember Bert Beekman, also known as Cysion. He's the co-founder of the Forgotten Empires studio. He's been a guest in episode 4 of this podcast, and this time he's joined by Sam. He's the narrative and level design lead at Forgotten Empires, and Alex. He's the art director at the studio. And much like last time I had Bert on the show, this episode comes on the heels of the release of yet another expansion for Age of Empires 2, Return of Rome. This is now the 7th expansion for AoE 2, developed by the Forgotten Empires studio, and it will be available May 16th, which, if I timed things correctly, should be the day this video was released. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time, and welcome to the show, my friends.
Thanks for having us.
All right, Sam, I'd like to start with you. Could you please just talk about your work at Forgotten Empires? Just tell me what is exactly that you do, and what does a typical day of work look like for you?
Okay, sure. So I am narrative and level design lead here at Forgotten Empires. I'm also our design lead on Age of Empires 2. I'm our point man on all things history. And in terms of work longevity, I just celebrated my 10-year work anniversary last year. And so a normal day in the office can be described as anything but. There's a lot of responsibilities that come up, and so every day is new and exciting and surprising. I do a lot of research work. I do lots of review, conceptualization, scoping, sorts of behind the scenes production stuff that keeps the train rolling. So for research, there's a lot of online reading. I'd try and make it to the local library when I can, but that depends on where I'm at the time. We have a lot of internet resources these days, thankfully, and so it's easy to mix up your research with academic literature ranging to more popular literature, because at the end of the day, this is the entertainment industry. We're making a game, and we want to make sure that the product is accessible to all.
All right, so if I understand things correctly, you're basically the boss of the campaigns, right? I mean, you're the one who takes care of the campaigns, and you sort of have the artistic vision of the campaigns. Is that correct?
In a way, but we're actually not joined today by our narrative director, who is the guy above me calling the shots, and that is Cedric. But yeah, he's not here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but you work very closely with the campaigns, if I understand things correctly, right?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Alex, just go ahead and the same thing, if you don't mind. Please describe what exactly is your work, what exactly do you do at Forgotten Empires, and what does a typical day of work look like for you?
Yes, so I'm Alex. I'm the art director at Forgotten Empires. I've been at Forgotten for over 9 years now. I actually started as art lead on the H2 HD edition, where I initially helped out the team to figure out a good workflow, making sure all the buildings and everything that came together look coherent and consistent, and also especially look consistent with the original game. So we definitely wanted back then to make sure that the expansion looks as if it was the original game. And since then, I've become art director on H1 Definitive Edition. My job was to make sure that we make it look good and modern, and make it look like people remember the game. Not like it was, but like they remember, with all the rose-tinted glasses.
Mhm.
So my job at Forgotten is basically to make sure to define the art direction of the game. How is the game going to look like?
Mhm.
What is the art style going to be? Which tools, which programs are we using? And then making sure the quality of the art is actually in the game and everything looks good. And what a typical day looks like. So we are mostly working remotely. So I'm working from home, and when I log in, I check our messenger apps. We're using Slack for messages for the team, And with the art team, we actually work with a lot of different partners. We work with different studios sometimes. We work with some outsourcing teams from across the world. So I have to
Hmm.
check all the messages in the morning to see whether there are any questions, whether there are any like technical issues that need to be resolved. And then, of course, the artists send me all the graphics they've created. And then I mostly give feedback. And sometimes I do a little bit of art myself, but it's mostly about directing people, giving feedback, and making sure the game looks as nice as it does.
Hmm. Awesome, perfect. Bert, how many people work for Forgotten Empires these days?
I think we're around 80 now.
80.
Um, yeah, it's quite a bit. It's a good number at this point. What I like the most about those 80 people is that we're currently in 30 countries. Like we have people across 30 countries as well. So there's certainly a lot of challenge there as well. Luckily, time zone wise, we're kind of to, together-ish. I'm gonna
Hmm.
say, so we can talk, we can coordinate. But it's a very international team. And what I really like about that is like whenever we make new content, we very often have somebody from that region, right? Like
Interesting.
a new
Right.
expansion is coming, and you have somebody from the region who probably has a bit of background there, or it's like, oh, this is actually my hometown, this is my home area, and that is sometimes very, very useful.
Hmm. Is there like a physical Forgotten Empires office somewhere in the world, or is it all remote work?
There is a little physical office. I think we're like 12-ish people in Malaga, in the south of Spain.
Right.
I
So
work
that's
there as
where
well.
you
Like,
live. Right,
yes,
right.
yes. I work from there as well, and then like 10 other people. But what's nice as well is that people kind of come and go.
Hmm.
Um, like Sam was here last year with the rest of the campaign team. They were
Awesome.
just like, oh, we're starting like a new thing, and it would be very good if we were just sitting together in the same room for like a week and just hash things out so we can
Hmm.
really start the next thing. And so we get some traffic, let's put it like that.
Right. So you were remote working before it was cool because, after COVID, everything became remote, right? But you were doing it before it was cool. Bert, right. So I think most folks who've been around forever and who've known who you are, even before Forgotten Empires existed, we're broadly familiar with your story in the community. But actually, I'd love for you to tell the whole story. How did you go from being a young man who thought it would be cool to create a mod with a few extra civs to now being the CEO of a company that employs over 80 people and has produced 7 DLCs for Age of Empires 2? What were sort of the stepping stones along the way? And feel free to go as much into detail as you want, because I do think it's a very inspiring story.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I'm going to say I hate the name CEO. I'm just going to say it. I don't like it. It's
Is it inaccurate, though? Is it inaccurate? Not really, right?
it's technically on my contract, so I guess it's accurate. So
Okay.
no, all right, sure. So we started many years ago. There was, I think, the summer of 2012. I was kind of looking around and browsing around on AOK Heaven Games, it was called back in the day. Both Alex and Sam were actually active on that forum as well,
Hmm.
many years ago.
That's so
And
interesting.
yes, and it was kind of a modding community back in the day. That was kind of the focus. Like the competitive community had their own like IG zones. It was called back back in the day, the pre-Voobly days. Um, and that was where kind of the modding scenario design community was hanging out. I found it very interesting, and there was this guy who was trying to figure out how to add more civilizations to Age of Empires. And he wrote down a guide where he somehow managed to add one new civilization. It was very wonky, like, don't think it worked in multiplayer, just like the editor. Uh, it was really wonky. Anyways, he was from Taiwan. Um, and he wrote down the guide in Chinese, which of course I couldn't
Oops.
understand. Google Translate existed luckily, but it was not as good as it is today.
Hmm.
And yeah, using his guide, I kind of figured out as well, like, hey, I can add a new civilization.
Hmm.
At that point, I got a bit stuck because I was like, okay, I can kind of figure out, like, hey, I'm adding a civilization. Back in the day, it was the Lombards. That was the first civilization I was playing around with, which eventually turned into the Italians. And I put the Lombards in the game. I had a few bonuses. I had some makeshift graphics that somebody else made. I was like, hey, can I put it in here? I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. But I was not the guy to really make the whole package. So very, very quickly, I was in a very fortunate position that that a lot of the people who grew up with Age of Empires were kind of at the age where they got out of university, or they had a higher education, or they kind of came back to a game they loved as a child, which was Age of Empires. And all of a sudden, these people were very smart, and they had learned a lot of things. And I was like, oh, I can program, I can make art, I can make an AI, whatever. And so we met the people behind User Patch, like really smart people who know how to mess around with code. A lot of people who made modding tools, who reverse engineered a lot of the data structures, people who could make art. And with that, I kind of managed to, I'm going to say, surround myself by very smart people who could do those things. And back in the day, we all just kind of did it because it was fun. Like there was no career in it for us, right? We all were like, oh, this is fun. I can, put content together and show it to a larger audience. And that's kind of how FE started. We were just like there for the heck of it, I'm going to say it, because it was fun and we could show our things to the world. Now, when we actually put the whole mod together, we had the 5 civilizations. Like there was one campaign in there. There was a bit of other stuff going on. The AI was there, some art. We went to release it on our website. We released it on Christmas Eve because I thought, hey, that is a great Christmas present for all the fans. And then I learned,
just to make it clear, this was a fan-made.
Yeah, this was on our website. Like, Microsoft was not involved there. It was just the mods that we were releasing, and we're like, yeah, this is super cool to release on Christmas Day as a Christmas present for the fans.
Right.
Terrible idea, because everything goes wrong on Christmas Eve, and all of a sudden you're spending your Christmas troubleshooting your website because it crashed from all the traffic, rather than actually spending time with your family, which is what you're supposed to do on Christmas. Anyways, in the end, it went really well. It was very well received. I think we had like 1 million downloads.
Yeah, 1 million is the number I remember, which is pretty mind-blowing, right?
It was mind-blowing, and I think before we released the mod, my idea was like, if we get 20,000 downloads, I'll be over the moon. I'll be super happy. And we had 20,000 downloads in the first hour, so that was like, oh wow, that was way too much. Anyway, at that time we were also like, there is something here. Let's try to get in touch with Microsoft and see what they think of this. And at that point, Microsoft kind of it took a while for them to come back to us, but it so happened that they were working on the HD edition at the time. We just released the mod/expansion, and that kind of set things in motion. They were like, yeah, we're interested. Right. It took many months. Like, I'm saying this in a span of seconds, but that was a conversation that took almost half a year.
Are we still talking 2013, 2014 here, roughly?
Now we're 2013. We're early 2013. So I think by April 2013. So we're actually 3 months after the mod had released. We were actually talking to Microsoft. Right. And then we released The Forgotten. We turned it into an official expansion. We had support from, I think, Skybox Labs at the time, who helped us with engineering. They put that in the game. And at that point, we were like, okay, we're done. This was a very nice experience. And I made a tiny bit of money from it, like not a lot. It was just like, it was a passion project for everybody, right? And I was like, I'm going to go on holiday with what I made here. So I was on holiday and I was in a hammock in a desert somewhere. And then I got a call and I was like, hey, Microsoft wants another expansion. It's like,
wow.
All right, that's very interesting. And yeah, then at that point, it really just went from one thing to the other. And what was really nice about that was that kind of gave us the opportunity to turn the mod team into a more professional team. Because all of a sudden we had like, oh, we actually have a project that we need to work on and deliver at a certain date. It's not a freestyle that you have with modding, right? But all of a sudden you have to think about all the things you did in the past, do that again, but properly.
How many
Um,
people would you say were working at Forgotten Empires back then? When you get this call from Microsoft, how many people were working on the mod?
I don't know, 15-ish, I think.
15, right?
Yeah, something like that. I think that's like a number I have in mind. But the thing also is like you have a lot of people who kind of help on the side, right?
Mhm.
Like you have somebody who's like, oh, I know somebody who can record Inca voices. Like back in the day, we
Right.
were like, I don't know where to do that, but we had a guy in South America, and it was like, yeah, my what was it? My mom knows somebody who speaks Quechua. Do we need that for a female villager? I was like, yeah, we do.
Amazing.
So those were like the all. There was a lot of people around that were kind of like, hey, we can help out a bit as well. So that was really nice. But like that core team of 15,
Mhm.
I think nowadays in Forgotten Empires, like still 10 of those are around,
They're still around.
including these guys. Like Sam and
Amazing.
Alex have been there for ages.
Amazing. All right, Alex, I'm obviously incredibly biased here. I've been playing this game for over 20 years now, but if I try really hard to be objective about it, I think Age of Empires 2 looks good. It's a game that is just very pleasing to look at least in my opinion. Now, to be fair, of course, the visuals we have today in the definitive edition are not necessarily the exact same ones we had 20 years ago, but I suppose the art style is still the same, right? So I guess first I'd like to know if you agree with this, and if you do, what's the expert explanation for that? What is it about the art style of Age of Empires 2 that has allowed it to age so well? No pun intended.
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting because we thought so too. Like back then when we started making definitive editions, we were like, yeah, these games still look good, the sprites still look good. Why do we make new graphics? But yeah, actually, when we then ended up actually making the definitive editions, like the difference became very clear because again, you have those rose tinted glasses, especially if you have played the game for 20 years. Of
Right.
course, you are used to it. You're not seeing it really objectively, and the graphics have aged. And speaking about that, there was one interesting thing when we were at Gamescom, and people came over to the booth and they asked, "Yeah, what's the difference?" And then they saw the screen, and they saw one castle being destroyed with a new physics-based destruction animation, and they were, "Wow, I can see the difference."
Right, right,
So
right.
that was really it. Um, yeah, of course, we did all these nice fancy effects, especially the building destruction, which we are very proud of. Um, but what makes H2 so distinct is actually the readability, in terms of the graphics, in terms of the buildings, the units. It's very clear to look at. So, for example, all the terrain, all the trees, all the surroundings are detailed, but they don't distract from the units and the buildings. Of course, there are players who like their cube mods and have cube trees and play.
Right.
There will always be those kind of players, but for the majority of players, it's very what we call readable because you can, in a fraction of a second, you can really understand which unit it is. Same with the buildings; they all have a very distinct shape, which we always try to make sure that when we remaster all these graphics that we have these very clear elements that are in
Mhm.
the original game that they are still in the definitive edition with the units, with the knights, with the cavaliers, with the paladins. We made sure those shields are exactly the same, so because these are all the things that make players recognize those units. So these things are very distinct in age, and we made sure with the definitive edition that it's still there.
Mhm. I have to imagine that for an artist such as yourself, you look at the cube mod, for example, it's gonna be so frustrating for you, right? I mean, you spend so much time thinking about the details of things, and then somebody just goes ahead and completely removes all of that.
Yeah, early on it hurt a bit, like when we were still doing the HD editions. That was when I was early in the career. Then it hurt a bit more because it felt strange back then. But now I'm just used to it. Like whatever players want to do with their game, if it helps them play the game, that's fine. But I know the majority of players don't have that installed, so I would never like make this a default option. But if someone wants to go ahead, yeah, why not? I mean, and there is still all the nice graphics in the game. Like, of
Mhm.
course, the trees are cubes. But I wouldn't look at it. I couldn't look at a stream looking with that. I couldn't, but if someone wants to do that, yeah, sure.
I think that's also one of the positive things about Age of Empires 2 is that it gives you a lot of options to enjoy the game, right? If you want to mod the game in this way, you can just go ahead and do it, right? All right, Sam, in all my years of playing Age of Empires 2, I was only ever interested in multiplayer. So my time with the game was always spent either playing online, organizing tournaments, or watching tournaments. I'd always heard good things about the campaigns, but I'd never played one from start to finish. Now, in preparation for this episode, I did watch a couple of playthroughs on YouTube, and I totally get it now. I totally see the appeal. I mean, these things really draw you in from the first minute. I don't know if it's the voice acting, the plot, the illustrations. I just know I wanted to watch one campaign playthrough, and I ended up watching like 3 or 4. So, what makes a good Age of Empires 2 campaign? What are the necessary ingredients?
It's really boil it down to three things. First is immersion value. The second one is accessibility, and then the third is storytelling. And these are the three things that are going to get players to not only start a campaign to begin with, because there's so many out there at this point. They have to choose one, or they choose none and just go over to multiplayer if that's what they want to do. So there's that, and you have to keep them involved, and you're hoping that when your players start a campaign, they're going to finish it all the way through. So I'll start with the immersion. Like I talk a lot about authenticity, and I'd make a distinction between accuracy and authenticity. Accuracy, you're pursuing exact historical details, which you really can't do in the first place. Authenticity is more the feeling that a player gets when they're playing the game. Like if I'm playing Franks, if I'm playing Joan of Arc, like I feel like I'm that character in that setting, facing the challenges that she's facing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that we try to communicate to players through the gameplay and through the storyline. Storytelling, if you're able to really play into what makes the characters and the settings unique, and then the story basically writes itself. And then gameplay, number one, you want the missions to be fun. If they're fun, players are going to play them, and that informs one of our main design pillars, which is playing. We design by playtest, and that if we find something fun, then chances are our audience will as well.
What exactly makes a mission fun to play in your mind?
It needs to be still recognizably Age of Empires 2, but usually brings something innovative to the table. And that can be some sort of game mechanic around which the scenario is built. It can be a narrative angle. There can be a plot twist in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really the crux of it.
I think one thing I wanted to add there about the authenticity, which I really like in the campaigns as well, is when you play a story, or a story set in your region, like where you live, you kind of want to recognize that region as well. Like you want to feel like, hey, this is a desert campaign set in, I'm gonna say nowadays Morocco. If you're
Mm-hmm.
from Morocco and you're playing that, you kind of want to see like, hey, this is something that I recognize. This is set in my history, and this is set in my region. And I think that's also a big part of authenticity. And indeed, as Sam said, it doesn't need to be exactly the way it's portrayed, but you need to feel at home,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a big part as well.
Mm-hmm. Interesting point, because a decent portion of the Age of Empires 2 fan base is very concerned with the historical accuracy of the game. And you can see this basically in every balanced discussion or whenever a new civ is introduced to the game. Now, for the record, I'm absolutely not a part of that group, but I totally respect the sentiment. Now, my knowledge of history here, Sam, is indeed very, very limited. But I'm told the campaigns, much like the rest of the game, and you just said it, are not 100% historically accurate, right? So I wonder, what are the kinds of things where, historically speaking, you're willing to bend the facts, in order to tell a better story? And what are the kinds of things where you go, well, there's no amount of artistic freedom that could ever excuse me completely butchering this one particular historical fact?
Wow. Okay. So a lot to unpack there. I'd say that one of our main goals is never to directly contradict history. But aside from that, the way that we present it to players is pretty loose. Even perspective and the way that events are conveyed. For example, if you want to take, there's a campaign about the conqueror Tamerlane from the 14th and the early 15th centuries. Objectively, terrible human being. The guy killed tens of millions of people throughout his military career, and was brutal and sacked entire cities, massacred armies, populations, everything. That is a detail that gets harped upon throughout the campaign, and you're put in this paradoxical situation where like you are playing as this guy and you are enacting the destruction while being told constantly throughout the narrative like how terrible the things are that you're doing. So you get faced with a real moral crisis as you move further and further in and to do commit more and more atrocities. The player gets to enjoy playing the game, but is also at the same time facing the fact that their protagonist here is more of an antagonist than anything else. At this point, I'll cut myself off because I don't want to hog the microphone.
That's really fine. I'd still love to hear from you. What do you make of the critique that the Romans do not fit the timeline in Age of Empires 2? Because it's something that a lot of people complain about too.
Sure. So easy answer to that. The Roman civilization in Age 2, they're based on the late Western Roman Empire, specifically from the year 395 roughly on. So that puts them in peerage with other civs of late antiquity like the Huns, the Goths, the Celts, the Britons. But the design of the civilization is very specifically set around that period of history. So they're on the edge, but they fit.
All right.
At least just as much as the Huns fit since the Conquerors.
All right. Alex, one thing I've noticed watching these campaign playthroughs was that some of the scenarios were just really pretty to look at. You know, at the end of the mission, the screen goes all visible, and suddenly you realize, hey, this is actually really beautiful. So is this something the art department is also responsible for, or how exactly are you guys involved in the creation of a new campaign?
This is actually very special at Forgotten Empires. We are one of the very few companies where the art department is not responsible for the art in the missions, because that is how basically Forgotten Empires grew, because Forgotten Empires came from the modded community from Age 2, and so the campaign team, they were all former scenario creators or modders, or mostly the core team back then was. And so they know the game, they know the editor, and they always made the whole map themselves. They wrote the story, they do the map design, and then they make the maps pretty. And they are so expert at that we don't need to have artists take another pass at it, right? Of course, the art team is still involved. We make sure the art is used properly by the campaign team. We also make sure if the campaign team has requests, we need like this special unit or this special building for our campaign for the story we created, and we help the campaign team a lot with the visuals where they ask for something, but they do all the work themselves on the actual missions. And usually in other companies, usually the scenario design team does the game design and the art is done by an art team. We're different in that way.
All right, that's very interesting, actually. Bert, I wonder how closely do you follow the development of a new DLC? Are you a very hands-on boss, and you demand a report of the progress every day, or do you have a more, let's say, hands-off approach?
I mean, they can correct me here, but I think I'm pretty hands-off. I think it's incredibly important that you can trust your team in building what they think is best. And frankly, that's also how FE started. I knew straight away that I was not an artist. I was not a designer. I could draw something. I could make a scenario, but I wasn't the best at it. So very, very early on, I knew I had to find better people to do these things. And I think that is also something that is kind of layered through the company as well. Like even the leads, like they kind of feel like, okay, of course I need to keep a close eye and kind of see how everything is going. But even them, they're like, yeah, you're working on this scenario or this asset every day. You probably know better. And I think that's very important. In the end, like a director and lead needs to see like, hey, there's a bigger picture, right?
Hmm.
And sometimes there are things where we need to steer that and say like, hey, don't forget we're actually, uh, like Alex said, like maybe an artist has made a beautiful asset for I don't know, a new elephant unit,
Hmm.
that is then shown, and maybe Alex is like, wait, this doesn't look like an elephant anymore. Like it has all these spiky things all around it. It's completely unrecognizable as an elephant. Then an art director, of course, needs to step in because that's like the bigger picture view they will have. And that's kind of how we lead. But like micromanaging and stuff, yeah, that doesn't work.
But do you still follow around? Do you ask to see what people are doing? Do you have an idea of where things stand before a new DLC is released?
Yeah, one thing that Sam said earlier is that we design a lot by playtesting.
Right.
So we have regular playtests, not just from the new campaigns, but also from the new civilizations. Like we have regular multiplayer tests within the team, and like that. If I just join those, I kind of have an idea, like, oh, this is new civilization being created, or this is new campaign that's being created. So I'm still aware. I'm still aware.
Hmm. Right. So, Bert, as I mentioned in the introduction, we're only a few hours away from the release of yet another DLC for Age of Empires 2. I think this is the seventh developed by Forgotten Empires. I mean, for the Age of Empires 2, and this one is titled Return to Rome. Now, I assume, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, the decision of whether and when to release a new DLC is made by World's Edge, the Microsoft studio responsible for the management of the franchise. But I do wonder, what are the dynamics between your studio and World's Edge when it comes to the development of these things? Do you guys have a say on what type of content will be included? Do you have a say on what civs are included? Or do you just basically follow orders?
A very interesting question. So we are always the ones to kind of pitch certain DLCs, or we suggest things. So far, I think every DLC we've created came from a suggestion that we put forward.
Right.
There might be additional requests that Microsoft has. There might be um, additional goals that they have, not just as World's Edge, but as like Xbox or Microsoft. Like there might be bigger goals that they're trying to achieve. But in the end, when it comes to, for example, civilizations, we're very often the ones to pick it. I don't think we've ever really had a civilization vetoed
Okay.
or anything. So that has never happened.
Mhm. So
Um,
there's a very close cooperation between you two, between both
yes.
studios.
Yeah, we don't work in a vacuum. Absolutely not. We talk to them every day, and not just me, but like I think even in this room, we talk. Everybody here talks to Microsoft almost every day, so we make sure that we're all kind of aligned. Like they don't want to be surprised at the end of a campaign expansion development and say like, hey, what the hell did you make now?
Hmm.
Um, but we check with each other every day, so yeah, very closely.
All right, all right. Sam, the new DLC brings 3 new campaigns to the game, and I believe all of them will be for AoE 1. Is that right? I mean, at first there was a bit confusion whether one of them would be Age of Empires 2.
You'll be playing as the Sumerians, the Macedonians, and the Romans from Age of Empires 1, indeed.
Right, so they're all for Age of Empires 1. So I'd love to hear from you, what does the process of creating such a campaign look like from beginning to end?
Sure. Preparation is so key. There's a quotation from The Art of War I love very much. It's victorious warriors win first and then go to war, while defeated warriors go to war first and then seek to win. So we focus a lot on pre-production, documentation, and planning. And when you have a strong foundation to build on, the entire process basically works itself. So, what does that process entail, you might ask?
Yes,
There's
please.
a research and scoping phase at the beginning because we want to decide what we want to make a campaign about. So we go
Right.
out, we read, we do research. We've got a variety of people with different backgrounds on the team. Like I have an academic background. I went through grad school back in the day, and then we have a couple other folks like that. Then we have others who are more well versed in popular culture, so you bring that element to the table, and we kind of put it all together, let it stew, and then decide what characters we want to pick, what stories we want to tell, what events we want to cover.
Mm-hmm.
And from that part, I don't want to get into like the nitty gritty details because that would take way too long. But as we're creating the levels themselves, there's a lot of iterative feedback loops. We try something, everyone tests it, we talk about it. We have many, many meetings, often ad hoc ones, about this sort of thing. And if something comes up, like we want to be open and social and discuss it.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back into the design by playtest principle that I talked about earlier. So after we get the levels developed, there's more of a polishing phase. You have more art assets coming in. You have voiceovers. You have like engineering support maybe for new features
Mm-hmm.
that we have in the game. So you get to go back and revisit the levels and add new things, play test them again and again, and then finally you get to the point where you have something that you're happy with and you're ready to release it.
Mm-hmm. How long would you say it takes from beginning to end to finish one campaign?
Whew. This depends a lot on the scope of that individual campaign. We've had some take longer than others, but the typical development cycle for from farm to table has taken around 8 months
Wow. Okay, that long.
for DLC. So that includes 3 campaigns usually.
Wow, that's a long time. How do you decide what stories to tell? I mean, you kind of talked about it, but do people first need to agree on one particular story or one particular character that they like, that they would like to tell a story about, and how does it work?
Yeah, it's a collaborative effort for sure. One of the big foci with this is that we think about identity and what the DLC is about,
Right.
and then what characters, what events, what figures are going to best embody the identity of that DLC. And we also want a variety. For I'll take Return of Rome for example. We have Sargon, who's known as history's first empire builder. It's this kind of like a watershed figure, and there's also this element of wonder and intrigue from events that are taking place so many thousands of years ago that they were ancient even to the ancient Romans.
Mm-hmm.
Then Pyrrhus of Epirus, he's more of an adversity fighter. He has a fascinating story, but things didn't go swimmingly for him. In fact, his career is basically a series of uh, marginal successes that are mitigated by overall failures. Like we have a term in modern English, Pyrrhic victory,
Mm-hmm.
for where you win the battle but you lose the war.
Right.
And then Trajan is basically you're looking at the pinnacle of ancient Rome.
Mm-hmm. Alex, a lot of the new DLCs also introduce new units to the game, right? So I also would like to know from you what's the process the art team has to go through before deciding on the final look of a new unit.
So for it's just very interesting because of course we do we have to make the units that the design team needs and the campaign team needs. So we don't decide what the units are going to be. That is decided by gameplay and by the campaign. But then we have to actually see, because there's so many units already in H2 and they all look distinct, that we have to make sure, okay, we have, let's say, another horse archer,
Mm-hmm.
and we have to, or horse archer type unit, then we have to look at all the other units in the game first and see if, of course, okay, these other units look like, for instance, brown horses or have certain kinds of armor. So when we then go design a new unit, we not only have to make sure it looks historically authentic, so it looks like a unit from a certain region would look like,
Mm-hmm.
and based on the research that Sam and the narrative and campaign teams are doing. But we also have to make sure it looks different from the existing units, so it does stand out. And we usually try to find one key element. For example, for the Burgundians, we chose the weapon, the long pole weapon, as weapon for the Cosilier, so it stands out from the other cavalry units. Just one example. And for all the other units, it's the same. We either make the colors different or the shape, so give it a very distinct weapon to make it stand out.
Hmm. Sam, apart from playing in a different time period, would you say that making a campaign for AoE 1 is vastly different than making one campaign for AoE 2?
In principle, no, but in practice, of course, it is a like Return of Rome is a different game than Age of Empires 2 is. So that's something that you have to basically work in terms of strategy design. This is totally different content. So the way that you think the design of the missions on that level is going to be different. But in larger overall theory and process, no.
No, not really. Okay. Well, what about the visuals, Alex? Are there any major differences between the art style of AoE 1 or AoE 2? It kind of feels to me like the colors in AoE 1 are a bit more vibrant. Is that correct?
Yes, so Age 1 back then, so in the original game, um, there were just 256 colors in the
Hmm.
whole game. It was that's called a palette. So you have a palette of 256 colors, and H1 back then was made very bright, vibrant, and colorful. And for H2, the Ensemble Studios back then wanted to make a more, slightly more gritty game, a bit more medieval, like
Hmm.
Dark Ages. Now we know historically there were no Dark Ages. It was just um, of course, there was less literature available, but people weren't living really in misery back then.
Hmm.
But back then, like the popular trope was the Dark Ages, so everything was a bit darker, a bit more gritty, and it had a darker palette. And now, when we have to go back to the definitive editions, we try to make sure to have that reflected. And now, with bringing H1 back into H2DE, we also had to make sure, okay, we have that very nice, vibrant feel.
Hmm.
And the other thing is also thematically where those campaigns are set. They are all set either in the Mediterranean or Near East. So it's slightly warmer regions. So the campaign team used, of course, like different settings than we usually have, like in William Wallace, for example. So more palm trees, more Mediterranean ground.
Hmm.
And that basically leads me to one thing that I did want to mention is in terms of campaigns uh, on picking which campaigns to choose is definitely also like variety in terms of visuals and civilizations.
Right.
So when the campaign teams makes a decision, of course, making something like War of the Roses could be interesting from a narrative standpoint, but then you would have only fighting English against English, and
Hmm.
also in the same terrain all the time, which would be kind of boring. So one of the things that the campaign teams actually does is making sure, okay, the stories actually lend to fighting different civilization and also being in different areas, regions that look visually different. So each mission has a unique feeling to it.
Hmm. Interesting. So, but at the end of the day, you had to recreate AoE 1 units in the AoE 2 engine, right? So, were there any unexpected challenges during that process?
Yes, that was actually quite interesting because we, of course, had made the definitive edition, and from H1 Definitive Edition to H2 Definitive Edition, we also learned a lot. We made the engine much, much better. It's
Hmm.
much faster. The sprites take a lot less disk space. It takes a lot less VRAM on your GPU. It works on much lower end machines than H1 Definitive Edition. So we had to change the sprite formats.
Hmm.
Also, the tile size is different. So H1 and H2 actually have different sized tiles, so we had to
Interesting.
rescale everything a bit,
Right.
and we had to convert all units, and some stuff we actually had to re-render. And also, one thing that is interesting is that H1 never had gates.
Right.
And trade cards, stuff like this, we had to do from scratch, which was also quite an interesting challenge to make.
Oh, Bert, a lot of people have complained this DLC has very little content for people who only want to play Age of Empires 2. They're only getting one of Civ, the Romans, which won't be available for ranked multiplayer at release. Is this a fair critique? Do you see where they're coming from?
I see where they're coming from. On the other hand, we're very clear about what we're offering here, right? Like we're saying like, hey, you get 17 civilizations in H1 mode.
Right.
You get the 3 campaigns in H1 mode. It's that's what we've created. That's what we're offering. And it is a bit of an experiment. It's a bit different. Let's put it like that. It is a very different approach to a DLC and expansion. It's not a traditional expansion
Right.
that people expect, and I guess in um, that expectation is not met for people, and therefore I understand. I understand. But on the other hand, if you're like, hey, I just want H2 content, that's fine. You can sit this one out. You can skip it. It's not a must-have, especially early on because Romans are not in ranked, so you're not necessarily missing out either. If you say like, hey, this is not for me, well, sure.
Hmm. I have the impression, as I've talked with other people, that the Vietnamese player base is one of the player bases you guys are trying to target with this DLC. Would that be a fair assumption?
Yes, that is absolutely a fair assumption. There
Right.
there is the Lac Viet civilization, the new civilization that is being added to this H1 mode. So absolutely, it's actually mind blowing how big H1 is in
Do we have
Vietnam.
numbers? Do we have like hard numbers on that?
I I don't have them, but I mean the one number I know is that if you look at popularity of esports and streamers, um, the Vietnamese there's this kind of Vietnamese superstar streamer.
Yeah, the Chim Sadie Nong. He's got 1 million followers on Facebook. I guess that's
Exactly,
what you're talking about. Yeah.
exactly, and that just blows the combined H2 scene out of the water. Even
Really
if
interesting. Yeah.
if you kind of look at just the raw numbers, right? But they're hyper focused in Vietnam. Like it's just there. It's
Mhm.
just there. Like we don't know him. We saw him briefly in Heidelberg,
Right.
in Red Bull Willow Legacy. Um, and it was also quite interesting because as soon as the event started, the H1 part of the event started, there was a huge spike in viewers uh, from Vietnam
From
on the
Vietnam, right.
Facebook platform. So
Mhm.
because that's where they're all hanging out. So there is absolutely a huge demand from Vietnam, and it's kind of like um, what I learned, and haven't had the chance to see it myself, but they said like all the cyber cafes, which are sadly kind of extinct in most of Europe, it's still huge in Vietnam, and like they
Right.
all play, like, they all have a copy of H1, and they all just play that old game because it just happens to be it keeps on being super popular there.
Mhm.
And that's part of it. And you can see it like you can go to a bar and see football. They can go to a bar and see
Watch Age
a
of
bit of
Empires 1.
H1. Yeah, because why not?
Amazing.
So,
Yeah,
of course, yeah.
I talked about this in my other podcast, but that guy, Chim Sadinong, he's got his own line of food. If you'll believe it, it's kind of crazy. Right, Bert, we were told the reason the Romans wouldn't be immediately available in multiplayer is because the team wants to tackle some balance issues with the Civ first, right? Which I think it's totally understandable, but it's something that it's not been done in the past. I mean, if I think back to the initial release of the Cumans and the Steppe Lancers, more specifically, which were virtually unstoppable. So, is this a new approach by the Balance team to first release new civs for the unranked lobbies only?
I think it's a bit of two things. Like one is indeed like, hey, we can try this. We have one civilization, let's try it. And the second thing is also like, it is indeed just one civilization. There might be a lot of people who, uh, you know, are not too interested because they just want H2 content. They might be frustrated, like if they just get stomped the first 2 weeks in ranked by an
Right,
overpowered Roman civilization.
right. I see.
So like that, we kind of avoid that as well. So it's also very, as you said, just a really nice way to experiment and see like, hey, is this a good way to introduce civilizations in ranked in the future? Uh, Maybe we do it again. Maybe we don't. We'll see.
Let's see. All right, so I'd like to talk to you folks a little bit about Age of Empires 4. As I understand it, Bert, initially Forgotten Empires was only involved in the development of the Art of the War missions for Age of Empires 4. But I'm told that as the months went by, your involvement in the game has sort of expanded a little bit. So in May 2023, what exactly is Forgotten Empires' role in the AoE 4 project?
Okay, now I have to make sure I don't say things that I'm not supposed to say, of course.
I
We
understand that.
are, yes. We've been over the last, Jesus, how long has it been already? 2 years that we've been working on this game? I think, yeah, something like that. We've been helping Relic out in various areas. Just to be very clear, Relic is still owning Age of Empires 4. They're driving it. They're alongside with World's Edge. They're making like the big decisions. And then Forgotten Empires has helped a lot with just expertise, saying like, hey, we've run into this problem, this design problem in Age of Empires 2, and we solved it this and this and this way.
Right.
They don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? Like when you just say like, we know it works in H2, let's just do it again, rather than introducing a lot of new
Hmm.
problems.
Hmm.
Um, and then we're also practically helping on the maps. I think most of the new maps that are now being released with the updates, the patches that are coming out, they're made by Forgotten Empires. We've made the Art of War, as you said, but also the balance team has a lot of people from FE on them. So
Hmm.
a lot of that is driven by our playtest team as well. That help out Relic. In the end, Relic still has like the last say on things,
Right. Right.
but we have a lot of people that help them out and kind of drive things there as well.
All right.
And yeah, then there's some other areas, but I can't talk about those yet.
All right, that's
Yeah.
fair. That's fair. All right, Sam. I'm told that both you and Alex, you've worked in the Age of Empires 4 project, but only for a short period of time, and not in your current capacities as narrative lead and art director. So I wonder what you, Sam, what you make of the AoE 4 campaigns. They are obviously very different from the Age of Empires 2 ones, right? In Age of Empires 2, campaigns usually focus on a specific character and kind of follow that character through a specific part of their life, right? Well, the AoE 4 campaigns are made in a more documentary style, I'll say. So, yeah, what do you make of the campaigns in AoE 4, and what would you have done differently?
They are different. They try a very bold set of approaches, and that for just in terms of someone with interest in the industry in general and development, I like seeing new things
Hmm.
and learning like what works, what doesn't. Like you pointed out, they are have like the different styles of narration, the documentary versus the more like dialogue slash like storytelling type that you have in Age of Empires 2, where maybe like you have the in-game cinematics from Age of Mythology, Age of Empires 3. So that's been interesting to see different vehicles of conveying narrative. In terms of the missions and the scope in general, they cover much broader periods of time.
Hmm.
For example, there's I think the Rus campaign that goes all the way over the course of several centuries, even. So this isn't necessarily focused on individual characters as much as a broader, more teleological approach to
Hmm.
history.
Hmm.
So that's it allows you to cover a wider scope, and that's nice because when you one of the regrets that I have sometimes when we make campaigns for Age of Empires 2 is that you bring a new civilization into the game. And this civilization's historical lifespan can be many centuries, sometimes even over a millennium. And yet the campaign that we make is only a snapshot of that history.
Hmm.
And you're lucky to get 50 years. So Age of Empires 4's approach allows you to cast a wider net. And that's nice as well.
Alex, I've heard a lot of people complain about the visuals of Age of Empires 4. I personally am not completely blown away by the graphics, but it's also not a turnoff for me. So, what do you make of the general look of the game, and what would you have done differently?
It's always a tricky question because there are, if you are in AAA development, there are so many different constraints that you might not be aware of,
Right.
like minimum spec for your PC, then maybe different platforms. H4 is coming to console at some point as well, so at some point maybe the creators back then, World's Edge and Relic, already thought ahead. Okay, at some point maybe we want it on console, so it has to work there as well. It has to play there as well. So if you have all the details and you're sitting away on the couch and everything is just full of details, you cannot really play it. Maybe that's why they stuck with that art direction. And I also think that is a very subjective thing in terms of art direction. Do I like it? Do I not like it? But if you like look past the art direction, there's so many little things that are in H4's visuals that you might not notice immediately. So, like every single civilization has a completely different architecture set. Like in H2, there's so many civilizations, they have all the same buildings, like the Teutons, the Goths, the Huns, they all have the same architecture set. But in H4, the Britons, the French, the Holy Roman Empire, they have all their unique houses. And Relic did so much research in making that accurate and making those civilizations look distinct. And also on the units, like every single piece of armor is from some historical research. Villagers change their graphics. Buildings they have when you build them, they place little roads in between. There's so much cool stuff that is just bringing so much new things to visuals to the Age of Empires franchise. I think if you look past like the art direction, there's so many cool things in H4. I think that will whatever comes next in the H franchise will probably have some sort of thing that H4 did, because there's definitely very cool approaches there.
Interesting.
That point about the research and the detail there is a really good one too, and that can be so hard to pull off. Like even in on very much more broad and general levels, like that balance between history, authenticity, visuals, fun. It's very hard to do. I'll give a cautionary tale from our end, and that was a couple of years ago when we did Dynasties of India. There's a unique unit for one of the civilizations, and it's a ship called, I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, but Thirasadai. And it's
the Dravidians, right?
Right, exactly. And so that was us perhaps trying to be a little too cute with historical detail. We dug a little in, and as it turns out, when the game got released, there's people couldn't find any
I
reference
remember
to
that.
the name.
I remember that.
And
True.
so
Interesting.
it's become one of the perpetuated rumors over the past couple of years. Like, this is fake. This is whatever. It's not fake. It's attested in a military manual in a language that is impossible for most people to read. But it's not fake. Nevertheless, like we basically got too cute, and as a result, we've birthed a common misconception. So that sort of pitfall is something you can run into all the time,
right?
And that's an important learning for us going forward. Maybe we edged over a bit too much into the. We tried to be a little too accurate, like I had said earlier, instead of focusing on authenticity. We could have just called the unit battleship,
right?
Because that's basically what it was, given it the distinct visuals,
right.
And you avoid it altogether. So who knows? Just things to keep in consideration going forward.
In your mind, Sam, what's the example of a game that does storytelling exceedingly well? And it doesn't have to be an RTS game.
Oh God, I'm the wrong person to ask this. I actually very rarely game on my free time. I'm just one of those people who, like, I do it for work. I love my job, and I cannot remember the last time I've had a bad day at work, if at all. But when I get off work and I'm in the after hours or on the weekends, I want to do other things. So as a result, my exposure to the grand world of gaming is relatively limited.
Well, I guess your answer would be Age of Empires 2 then. Well, let's go with that. Alex, what's...
biased, but sure.
Right. What about you, Alex? What's the most beautiful game you've ever seen or played?
Oh, wow. That's also a very different question. Difficult question. Well, I really love the new God of War visuals. Are great. Also, Horizon Forbidden West really looks gorgeous. So much detail in the game, and I actually do love the Forza Horizon series.
Right.
Because the visuals, like you
that
drive in
game
the
looks
car,
gorgeous,
always
yeah.
like I
Amazing.
think the latest one was in Mexico. It's just like these vast landscapes, the lighting, all the plants, all the car detail. It's so amazing. You feel like you're there, I think.
Hmm. All right. Bert, I've said many times before in the show, to me, the DE version is hands down the best version of Age of Empires 2 we've ever had, and it's not even close. I think the game looks great. I think the balance changes you guys keep bringing are very sensible, and it's clear to me you're listening to the feedback of the community. So, huge props to you and your team. I think you've done an amazing job. But one thing a lot of folks still complain about is the matchmaking system, particularly the team game matchmaking system. I only play 1v1, so I have no experience myself with playing team games in DE, but again, I very frequently read complaints about it, and to be fair, I don't think much has changed since the game was released. So, are there any plans to overhaul the matchmaking system and maybe give players more freedom to play the settings they enjoy the most, or is this just not a priority for you guys at the moment?
It is something that's being worked on. I don't really want to go into detail because I can't, but
Right, but it's something you guys are considering.
it is definitely on our radar. It is something that is being talked about between ourselves and World's Edge, but also Relic, because the whole multiplayer system is kind of based on Relic Link.
Mhm.
So if you want to make changes, you also have to keep in mind, like, oh, this is a change that might require work in the platform in Relic Link, which would
Right.
therefore
Okay.
affect H1, 2, 3, and 4
I
equally.
understand. Hmm.
So there's always this, yeah. If anyone working in production might see, like, oh, that's tricky to navigate, and it is. But we are aware of it, that there is room for improvement. It's just a matter of, okay, how can we make sensible changes that are beneficial for all the games that use the platform, because some of the changes and some of the things that are being asked in the um, um, community are not just limited to a single game. So
I see. Hmm.
yeah, there's a
That's a
technical reality.
very
Yeah.
important point there. Okay, which I think a lot of people had in mind before. All right, last question, Bert. I'm about to let you guys go. Considering this DLC, Return to Rome, doesn't have a whole lot of exclusive AoE2 content, can we expect another one later in the year? Maybe for Age of Empires 2 only?
I wish I could say that. But unfortunately, I can't say anything sensible as an answer to that. All I can say is really, like, Age is alive and kicking. Has been alive and kicking. I mean, I think it was only, what was it, 2 months ago? I think Age of Empires hit its records uh, players. Um,
Because of the controller player base, probably, right? Because of all the
yes,
people that came from Xbox.
it was a huge amount of people that came on console, but also we have seen over the years since Definitive Edition was released that uh, just the audience on H2 has either increased or stayed pretty stable. Like,
Right,
sure, it goes up and down,
right.
and people always are very quick to point out, like, hey, look at the Steam numbers. Like,
Hmm.
this is how things are evolving. It's also interesting. Like, Steam numbers tell a part of the story. There are players on the Microsoft Store which are not included in those numbers. Now we have a large Xbox contingent of players, and then there's also a significant amount of players on xCloud. xCloud is, I think it's included with Game Pass Ultimate.
Hmm.
It's
I
basically
think
where you can
I've never heard of
play
it.
Age of Empire, well, any Xbox game through the cloud. So the idea is, like, you have a device, uh, you have your xCloud account, and you can basically from any device play Age of Empires. Uh, I think it was last week I saw somebody playing Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition from Chrome.
That's crazy.
It's like that shouldn't happen, but today
Oh,
that's possible.
that's possible.
And there's also, like, there are players there.
Mhm.
Uh, the Viper is not playing from Chrome. I know that, but there are players who are like, okay, I've got xCloud and I don't have the best PC, but I can run Chrome. And all of a sudden, thanks to cloud gaming, I can now play H2 as well. So there is this massive player base that is kind of spread across all those platforms.
Mhm.
And that's a very, very healthy amount. So as long as we have a very healthy amount, and as long as people want new content, I hope we can keep on supporting the game as long as possible.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. This was very informative. Thank you so much. And good luck on the release. And I'll really hope that the game continues thriving as it has been the case, definitely. And once more, thank you so much for taking the time, guys.
Thank you.
Likewise. Thanks, Nelson.
Likewise.
Appreciate it.